Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Talking Animation Podcast. This is where we like to every month talk about animated film that we want to talk about. And this one is one I've been very, very excited for. It's Suzume from director Makoto Shinkai. We're going to talk all about it, deep dive. And I'm from Rachel Wagner, and Zach Kircher is here.
Hello, thank you for having me. Appreciate
Yes.
it.
Yeah, so you've been on Criterion Project, but you haven't ever been on my show. So why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Like Rachel was saying, my name is Zach Kircher. I'm a pretty I'm a very, very small time YouTuber. I just kind of do it as a hobby, not
Mhm.
looking to do it as a career, but yeah, I thought it would be kind of fun for us to talk together about this movie because the two of us share a deep love for Makoto Shinkai's Your Name. In
Mhm.
fact, it was the film that I pretty much consider to be like the one that reinvigorated my interest in anime that kind of waned earlier in my teen years.
Yeah.
But now as an adult, I'm like, wow, I kind of wish I watched more of this stuff. But yeah, I like talking about movies, video games, anime too, if it's something that I'm interested in, and
Mhm.
that's kind of what led me to talking here today.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about our experience with Makoto Shinkai as a director. So was Your Name your introduction to him as a director, or had you seen his other films?
No, it was yes.
Yeah, it was for me as well. Like I've gone back and now seen his earlier films, Garden of Words and three, I think it's 3 centimeters per second. Anyway, we have reviews for both of those on the channel. But some of his earlier stuff I've now, went back and watched after I saw Your Name. And I can't remember where I first heard about it. But oh, where I did first hear about it was actually on there's a YouTuber named Cellspec, and
Oh yeah, yeah. I watched her
yeah,
too.
she's great. And she was the one that in one of her like wrap up videos or whatever, she mentioned it, that it was a masterpiece and that it was really great and people should go see it. And so I requested it from whoever was running it, Funimation, I think at the time. And so I got the screener. So I saw that December, and I loved it. I got super, super hyped. And then it finally came in April of the next year. And so I got to see it in the theater, which was incredible. And yeah, I absolutely love Your Name. I think it is just such a perfect movie. In just I think there's so many things I love about it, but I love that it's so effective on so many different levels. It's funny, it's dramatic, it's romantic, it's just every emotion that you could want in a movie for Your Name. Do you agree?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And it's kind of interesting that you talk about different YouTuber being the one who brought you into experiencing that movie because that's kind of how it was for me as well. Except um I first heard about it from Chris Stuckman
Mm-hmm.
when he talked about it. And I distinctly remember when I saw his review that I'm like, okay, that year my favorite animated film, and actually at the time my favorite film of 2016 was Kubo and the Two Strings.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember he really loved that as well, but then he came along and reviewed Your Name, and I'm like, man, is this movie really so good that it beats out Kubo? And so at first I was kind of like, I kind of watched it sort of out of spite. I wanted to watch it out of spite in
Mm-hmm.
that sense,
Mm-hmm.
but then yeah, when it came out in theaters and I saw it with a packed theater for the dub showing, I was like, oh, okay, I guess it really is that
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I do
um,
actually remember that about Chris Stuckman because I believe he did a whole trip to LA just because there was like two theater Oscar screening
yeah, yeah,
yeah, for the movie. He flew all the way to LA to see it. I do
crazy.
remember that review. And yeah, it's just something special. I mean, the layers that you can appreciate the film, even as far as the religious symbolism within the film, the I think it's a very spiritual film. that once you kind of walk in somebody else's shoes, then you will do whatever you can to save them. Like once you understand the humanity of another person, you that's all that's needed for him to want to save her and find her, even though he can't find her. And it's just so like moving.
I pretty much
So
feel the same about that for
yeah.
sure.
And I have noticed, I do feel like sort of spiritual people appreciate Your Name even the most of it's just, it's got such a beautiful humanity to it.
Mhm.
And so, and it's just so beautiful. And I talked about it. We actually did, my friend Christine and I did a 2 hour deep dive on it when it
Mm.
came out. And then I actually got a chance to interview Radwimps for rotoscopers. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My only time ever interviewing rock stars. That was pretty cool.
Well, of all the ones to do it, you might as
Yeah.
well do it for a guy for, someone who pretty much made for the emotional current of that movie
Yeah.
as good a music as that movie did.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I mean, I think the dub is pretty good, but I would say for people to see the sub, I mean, I always would say that, but I would say for Your Name, because I think the music is a lot better with in the Japanese,
Mhm. And there are like some
personally.
context clues with like some of the humor that kind of makes more
Yeah.
sense in the Japanese language too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so what did you think about Weathering with You? How did you feel? I mean, it's hard because the expectations were so high for me, and
Mhm.
it was hard for me to kind of tamper those down a little bit. I tried. But what did you think of your Weathering with You?
Yeah, so for Weathering with You, I do appreciate that movie quite a bit. Um, I think partially just because it is so well animated, and also just because even though it is a film that many, including myself, have said is basically a re I don't want to say a retelling of Your Name, but sort of a reworking of it, like if its basic story beats and kind of the general idea of you know natural disasters and two people kind of coming together in that sort of scenario to strive for love, even with like those circumstances surrounding them. I think the core relationships in the movie are still strong enough to where I can appreciate what the movie is doing on its own, um,
Mhm.
to really feel the emotion of that story. It for me, it kind of transcends some of those things that feel very familiar to what happened with Your Name, as well as like just some more of the silly moments, like the things involving the gun, which I'm sure has been
Mhm.
discussed in other videos, but that's kind of my
I
general
don't
feeling
think
on it.
it is near as good as Your Name. That it's
Oh
not
no.
close, but I do think it's still like it's still, I certainly still recommended it, and it's still a beautiful film. I think the ending is like really nuts. Like you have to accept Makoto Shinkai is like a hardcore romantic. He is like, I mean, even for me, I'm a Hallmark girl, and he's even a lot for me. I I the fact that we're supposed to feel happy about this ending where they end up together when all of Tokyo is underwater. Like, that's not like a bitter. It's not played as like a bittersweet ending or it's like a sad ending or no. It's like so you're supposed to be happy. And I'm just like, wow, that's a lot. Thanks,
The whole
but
entire city is flooded, and you're
yeah,
like, oh yeah, two teenagers are together now.
right.
Cool.
And you also have the gratuitous McDonald's promotion in Weather Review, and then he does it again in Suzume, maybe not quite as
Yeah, I was
bad.
about to say.
Yeah, it's not quite as bad as in Weather with You, but it's yeah, he was definitely um, definitely willing to sell his film, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Yeah, but it's still I think that you got to admire kind of the commitment to romance that he has and the beautiful animation and the environmental message is a lot heavier handed than in Your Name, but That's what makes the ending even more bonkers, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't
But
know. Like it's I think this might, feed into more of our discussion with Suzume, of course, but I think if you look at Weathering with You and then of course with Your Name,
mhm,
despite just how absolutely insane the implications of Weathering with You's ending is,
mhm,
you look at it and you think, okay, well, I at least appreciate his perspective that, we should look with hope towards the future, with the people that we love,
yeah,
despite these crazy things happening, like, and whether it be Tokyo is flooded or whether it be Itamore is absolutely wrecked by a
mhm,
fragment of a comet or stuff like that, you hold
mhm.
on to the things that you appreciate and love about life and you allow those things to not um I guess control your destiny, I suppose.
He is a very hopeful director, and I think Your Name, I mean, it works better because they saved the town,
Yeah.
through their love and everything that happens. Where so I guess maybe you could say that you'd almost want to say that Whether You is more cynical, but it's really not. It's just that he believes that there's we should be happy for this couple that survived it all. And we are, so it's okay. No, it's just interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if the couple wasn't likable, then that'd be different, but they are,
Yeah,
so it
that's
works out.
true. Are you a fan of Rachel's reviews? Do you look forward to Family Movie Night, Female Film Critics panels, or the Talking Disney podcast? If so, please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a Patreon. As a patron, you get to access monthly events such as the watch-alongs and Q&As, where you get to talk to stars and find out the behind the scenes of the movie making industry. And you can pick what I review for Family Movie Night or even become a guest on the podcast. Podcasts and YouTube channels are expensive, and I really, really could use your help. I would so appreciate it. You also get to be a member of the Facebook group where we talk about all the films that we're seeing, and we have so much fun. Go to patreon.com/hallmarkies and select one of the Rachel's fan tiers. That's patreon.com/hallmarkies. Well, let's talk about Suzume. And how are you pronouncing it? Is that right? How are you saying it?
I was pronouncing it as Suzume, like,
Suzume.
I'm just kinda making it more direct, but, I mean, I don't speak Japanese, so I
I don't
I
either.
doubt I'm right either.
Tell us in the comments how we're supposed to say it. But
Mhm.
Suzume is the little summary is it's a 17-year-old girl who lives in a quiet town in Kyushu, meets a young man on a journey looking for doors. Suzume follows him to a ruin to a dilapidated building in the mountains and finds a freestanding, undisturbed door. And Suzumi feels drawn by an invisible power and reaches out to the door. Soon, doors are all over Japan. They start opening one after another. The doors that open must be closed to shut out calamity that lies on the other side. Stars, sunset, and the morning sky. The places she wanders into have a sky where all hours of the day seem to blend together. Beckoned by the mysterious doors, Suzume journeys. Suzume's journey of closing doors begins. And that's from IMDb summary. I did not write that. But I mean, overall, what did you think of the film of Suzume?
No, I have seen a lot of reactions from people on Letterboxd and Twitter saying it's among Shinkai's best. And that's fine. We all had different reactions.
Yeah.
Strangely enough for me, I think it's among the weaker ones I've seen of his. I haven't seen what's that called? The Place We Promised in Our Earlier Days or
Oh
whatever
yeah,
it's
I haven't
called.
seen that either. I need to see that.
Mhm. And I haven't
Um,
seen Children Who Chased Lost Voices, but
mhm. I would definitely put it above Weathering with You personally. So I'd have it on the higher end, but it's not without its flaws. So I can understand and definitely if you're not kind of into fantasy, this one leans more into fantasy than any of the others. So
oh yeah. I don't think that's necessarily my issue because, like, I love the fantasy genre if it's done well. I mean,
mhm.
we just had the D&D movie a few weeks ago, and I really went for that.
Yeah, that was really fun. We should say, at least I've only seen it once. So
Same.
it's hard to do, almost hard to do sort of this deep dive when you've only seen it once. But yeah, I mean, it definitely has a lot going on and a lot to follow.
Impressions of the movie, whereas
Mm-hmm.
those ones we were talking about earlier, those have been set into our minds after,
Right.
I've seen Weathering with You 3 times, and who knows how many times for Your Name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
But
true.
yeah, so yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, I think what impressed me the most about the movie is that it was continually surprising. I just felt like I had no idea kind of what was going to be coming up next, whether it was going to be this cat, or whether it was going to be the column of fire, or whether it was going to be, something with her mother, or it was just continually kind of reinventing itself and taking me on. It kind of reminded me in that small way of something like Spirited Away, in the sense of like, in Spirited Away, I just have no idea what is coming up next. Like, it could be a giant baby, it could be the dragon that turns into paper. Like, it's just, you have no idea. And it maybe not quite that strong, but it did have that kind of a feel for me of like, of just surprise.
Yeah. And I like that you brought up Spirited Away, because I feel that this movie, out of everything, in I guess what we would unofficially call like Shinkai's disaster trilogy,
Yeah.
this feels the most overtly like a Studio Ghibli or a Miyazaki movie,
Yeah.
where it has these grounded characters, but they're in these very out of the ordinary circumstances that they're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
He even
and
names the
I
city
appreciate, yeah,
Miyazaki. He even names the city. Did you notice that?
right.
Yeah. So I think it's intentional.
Yeah, and I mean, there's even the little part in there where, someone in the scenes where they're showing people basically capturing Instagram reels of, um, forget the cat's name, but Daijin.
Yeah, Daijin.
When they catch a little video reels of Daijin, one of them's like, "It's just like Whisper of the Heart," and then later in the movie, the friend of Sota, he's playing that one theme from Kiki's Delivery Service, and he's singing along with it on the radio. So I don't know. Those are like more superficial kind of influences, but it's also felt throughout too.
Well, even just having it be a young lady, and also having it be the cat, that's very Miyazaki too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So basically happens is Suzume meets this man who asks about ruins, his man named Sota, and she tells him about these ruins, and he finds this door there. She follows him, and she opens the door, and it's a doorway into this amazing cityscape, I guess. Amazing, what do you call it? Stars and beautiful nature. And so she goes in, and she finds this cat statue, and the cat statue becomes like a real cat. That's the Daijin. And that kind of sets off, because the Daijin is a keystone, it kind of sets off everything. And there's this whole world of ever after. That's why I was saying the fantasy elements that they become kind of trapped in, and they have to then go all around Japan and break down all of these keystones that are there in order to save. There's this big earthquake that's going to happen, and then also Soda becomes turned into a chair. And not just any chair, it's a chair made by Suzume's mother. We find out later. So yeah, what did you think about all this sort of setup?
In terms of the setup, that was one of the weaker elements for me, in the sense that like the hook of the story itself, that was something I could definitely get into. But I think it felt like the setup was a little bit too rushed for me personally. Maybe that'll feel better on a second go through, but we kind of jump immediately into a lot of these things without much context, which sometimes can work. But I think because of that, I didn't really have enough time to kind of get my bearings straight on who the characters are, like, what their
Mhm.
backstory is and kind of what their emotional baggage is, which we do learn later on. Um,
Y- Yeah.
Thankfully, as it kind of takes its time a bit more, that's one thing that I feel this movie could have benefited from more, though, is even though it is 2 hours, there are parts where it feels like it's really speeding through some things, whether it be character development or dropping in those plot elements. And then when
Mhm.
it does take its time, it's kind of focusing on some things that I just didn't really care for as much. We'll probably get there when we get there, but
Yeah. It was a little bit confusing. I will agree. It's definitely helped that I kind of now have some more context. It's the kind of movie
Mhm.
that you're probably actually sort of better off reading the plot before you go in to see it, especially with it being in another language and trying to follow along and everything, which I think is great. But it was a little confusing. I agree, and I felt like the worms, which are the columns of fire, they
Mhm.
were they didn't look great.
No.
The whole movie is absolutely stunning in animation, except for this. I don't understand why they made that decision to make the worm CG and make it look cheap. It just everything else is so beautiful. It just really stood out.
No, yeah, that it felt the same to me. I'm not gonna mention what it made me think of, for the sake of
Hmm.
um, for the sake of this conversation, but I just thought the design of them was kind of unfortunate, just to leave it
Yeah.
at that. But also just you have these environments that are so beautifully realized, like all of this studio's works, not just Shinkai specifically. Um, I think the
Hmm.
character animations compared to previous movies of his have also improved. The characters are very expressive and very fun to watch interact with each other. And then you just have these big red monstrous things that I didn't really feel I get later on, like how it kind of factors into the story, and there is some really good dramatic emotional depth that comes from the threat that they pose to the characters, but like
Yeah.
it being manifested as these big worm things, I'm like, I don't really care about this so much.
Yeah, it just looked cheap, like cheap CGI, and everything else looks so
Yeah.
great that I just don't understand why they made that decision. It was weird. But I have to admit I did really enjoy everything with the chair. I when I saw that
Mhm.
in the trailer, I was like, "Oh, that seems like a lot." But I don't know, I thought it was funny. I enjoyed pretty much everything with the chair.
Oh yeah, I loved
Yeah.
that too. I remember seeing. Do you follow David Sims at all? Another
Mhm.
critic.
Mhm.
I saw his reaction on Letterboxd, basically saying like, "Why did they make him a chair? He was like such a hot guy." Um, and he is, you know,
Yeah.
looking at that perspective. But I think they really made it. They did a great job at being able to balance that character dynamic between Suzume and Sota as the chair. And it made for a lot of really fun interactions with him, especially with him being in that physical form.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. So the Daijin explains that Suzume's ability to see the worm and the ever after through the doors means that she accidentally entered the realm once before. Moreover, the doorway that she first used is the only place where she can re-enter the ever afters and save Soda. So that's why she has to go and try to find the one that she has these dreams of her as a child, and so she has to find that original door that she went through when she was a child.
Mhm.
And so there's definitely like a heart to all of this because it's coming back to her losing her mother, and also trying to save the city from this earthquake, plus you have the trying to save Soda. So there's kind of a lot going on. And Suzume goes with her aunt, Tamake. So they're going to her childhood home to try to find the door. And they end up, there's this guy, what's his name?
Serizawa, I think it was.
Serizawa, who ends up kind of going with them. And they just tried some some comic relief there with his car and his music and some of the other things. But yeah, considering some of the parts are pretty rushed, I could have probably gotten rid of some of those road trip elements and just and had more about the setup and the ever after and the worms and all of that we kind of need to know a little bit more about.
That's pretty much what I was referencing when I was talking
Hmm.
about how like there were some parts I could have appreciated more time and just, being able to kind of pace ourselves a bit more. And then when it got to those scenes with the road trip and that character in particular, that's when it really started to drag for me
Hmm.
anyway. And this is like, right in the I'd say like a little bit after the midway part of the movie where it's kind of
Hmm.
leading towards the third act. And so that's when it started to lose a little bit of the dramatic momentum for me. And I kind of wished like, yeah, this character is not really doing much for me comedically or just dramatically. They probably, yeah, I agree with you. That part could have been cut out.
Yeah, but I mean, it was still fun enough. I was just really impressed the way the movie just kept reinventing itself, kept surprising me with new ideas, and I think it was very effective in that way. But yeah, there could have been a few changes to the script to make it a little tighter. But yeah, the animation throughout is really really funny and beautiful, and there ends up being the twin of Daja, the
Mhm.
what's it called, Sajin, that ends up being there. And so then there's this whole thing with them trying to put the keystone in the worm.
We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies merch store.
Are you looking for that perfect gift for the postable, hardy, or Hallmarky in your life?
What about getting that t-shirt or hoodie that will help you stand out at your next holiday party?
Now is the time to check out the Hallmarkies merch store.
Full of festive designs by artists like Jessica Miller, Carrie from Hallmark Comics, and more.
You can even have more than just shirts, but totes, cell phone cases, notebooks, mugs, and more.
And it isn't just Hallmark. We have designs for Anna Green Gables, Man from Snowy River, The Nanny, and more.
Every purchase at the merch store goes to help support the podcast and allows us to make the great content you know and love.
There are frequent sales, so go to tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies or see the link in the description.
That's tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies.
Point, then she gets really angry with Tamaki, and basically says like, "You're not my mother." And they have some conflict there, and she says, "Well, I sacrificed so much to take care of you." And so anyway, they have some conflict at that point.
Mm. And that kind of blows up into that big moment. I mean, are you okay with me like going into too many spoilers here?
Yeah, no, I
Or
think it's fine. It's a recap.
okay. Yeah, and that goes into that moment where Tamake basically says not just what you just summarized, but also basically, my whole life is ruined because, you basically entered into my life at a time where I could have been, finding a husband and doing all these things. And um I think in the moment it allows them to have some good dramatic development together. And I think there's some good resolution to that in the third act.
Hmm.
Although that was another thing to where I wish there could have been more time cutting leading up to that moment feeling a bit more inevitable. When it
Yeah.
happens, it kind of feels out of left field a little bit. Like, oh, I didn't realize this was like such a problem that Tamake was kind of like harboring in her mind, even though she probably didn't mean everything she said. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, they hadn't
anyway,
spent that much time together, and so I mean, aside from just driving. And so yeah, it
right.
is a little bit surprising. He said that he realized that he could no longer create entertainment for the sake of it, but his mission had to be to use art to share that traumatic experience with the world, and perhaps find
Mm.
some meaning in it. He's talking about the earthquake, and this is through Suzume's journey. The movie shows the natural beauty of Japan, but also the tragedies that natural disasters leave behind. The only thing that people can do when faced with them is accept their role as part of something larger and move on, looking at the future with hope, which is definitely, you see that in Weathering with You,
Mhm.
for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then they also said the doors that Suzume and Sota close literally connect the past to the present and the future. Thus, the gesture of closing them is a metaphor for coming to terms with the past, no matter how tragic. And then she realizes that she thought that she had met her mother in the door as a child, but it was actually her older self through the door.
Yeah, that was a great moment.
Mm-hmm.
It almost kind of reminded me of The Prisoner of Azkaban. That whole
Oh,
Harry
yeah.
Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban,
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
there was that whole thing with the time travel element where Harry thought he was being saved by his dad, but then it just ends up being himself. And something very similar happens here. But are we
Mm-hmm.
good to like kind of talk about the
Yeah.
ending now and the
Yeah.
implications of
Let's
that?
do
Or
it.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think this movie does a great job um taking some of those themes that you're talking about, Rachel, and bringing them full circle with its conclusion. Um, because if someone didn't know that this movie was basically about the 2011 earthquake and tsunami beforehand, it probably wouldn't hit as hard. But I think having that context and seeing the movie and how respectfully it treats that disaster, but also I can really see Shinkai's um, mission as you described it coming through in the things that happen in the finale, where Suzume, 17-year-old Suzume meets like 4 or 5-year-old version of herself and just comforts her, offers her words of encouragement to keep moving forward despite all of
Mm-hmm.
her tragedy. I thought was a very beautiful moment and a great way to close the story, especially because I could basically see Shinkai using this narrative as a way to tell the youth of Japan to be like, it's okay. You've gone through hard things, and we all know that you've suffered much, but there's great beauty in this world that you could strive for, that you should have hope for, which has been a theme that's been, of course, in the other movies he's made about disasters, but also comes through very well just vicariously him giving this speech to the troubled youth of Japan with everything that Suzume says. I thought it was great.
Yeah, and that your memories of these traumas can actually, by sharing them, you connect with other people, and that's powerful. And I think that that's part of what he's talking about. I mean, some people will just get too lost in sort of like the ever after and the fantasy and the other things going on, but but I think that at the core, the story is about Suzume connecting with Sota, with her aunt, and realizing that losing her mother and the earthquake, everything that happened had like value for her life, and that she can like connect with people over that. I think that's true.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, in one of the articles I read, they said ultimately Suzume is a movie about the power of memories and feelings to connect people, exemplified by the fact that to close a door, Suzume and Soto have to think about the people who lived in that place and their feelings for
Mm.
each door. So that makes sense that they do. And it's one that I can see almost, because he sets up this whole lore, I can almost see him doing more stories. And because Your Name is just that one event, there's not like a lore really. I mean, I
Sure.
guess there's the band and some other things like that, but this one I could picture telling a lot more stories with these doors and the ever after and everything.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
think
it
it could be
almost kind of
interesting.
feels, if they were to expand it more, it almost kind of has like a video gamey feel to it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I say this more so just because I think I have more experience in games than you, Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yep.
but
Well,
you have the whole
wouldn't take
first
much.
half of the um but pretty much the whole first half of this movie is them going to location to complete an objective of closing those doors.
Mm-hmm.
And so who knows? Like if he wanted to expand it into more stories, I think that'd be a neat idea, especially
Mm-hmm.
in kind of a video game scenario where
Yeah.
you have to explore these different situations and become more familiar with the environments that you're going back and reliving the memories of. But again, that's just kind of me
Mm-hmm.
thinking outside the box a bit.
Yeah, I think it would be really fun. I was surprised that they made this Dajin cat that he was so mischievous. He wasn't like the cute, adorable cat I was expecting.
Mhm.
He causes a
Yeah,
lot of trouble.
sort of like Loki in that sense, kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
like a Japanese version of him in a way, god of mischief.
yeah. It's true. It's true. So yeah, it had its flaws, but I still definitely really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the experience of watching it and just seeing something fresh. And that every scene I felt like, oh, I wasn't expecting that to happen. And that was new. That was surprising. And he has such like a beautiful soul. I would love to interview Makoto Shinkai because I think again, he's a very hopeful, um, positive guy. I would just love to talk to him.
Well, hopefully that can happen sometime. We'll just have to keep helping your audience grow more.
Yes, please, everybody. I mean, I got Rad Wimps. That's a step. Which, by the way, what do you think of their music? How do you feel about it in the movie?
Oh, do you mean in this movie in particular?
Yeah.
Well, their music is a bit more downplayed in this one.
Mhm.
There's not like any, like the two previous movies that Shinkaya's did, where there were montages of like basically these J-pop songs that would come in along with the more mellowed out orchestral themes.
Yeah.
Suzume is kind of like the same rhythm throughout. It sort of has orchestral music that pervades the whole movie, and there isn't really a vocalized song until
Yeah.
the end credits. But I thought that worked.
Yeah.
I'm just as cool with minimalistic music as much as more maximalist stuff.
Yeah. It almost, to me, it helped with these fantasy elements, I think, because it felt sort of more like a fantasy film, like something, not John Williams, but somebody like that, this sort of classic score. It was really different than the other stuff that Rob Williams has done with him. And in fact, when I looked up, I wasn't even sure that it was them because it felt so different. And then I was like, oh yeah, because it's definitely moving away from, like you said, the J-pop kind of ballads, I guess you might say, and it
Mhm,
feels more classic. And I liked it. I thought it was effective. I enjoyed it.
mhm.
So yeah, I think because I don't know, I just find the ending to Weather With You to be really bonkers. I think the ending for this is more satisfying. So that makes a big difference to me. I thought this one is just better as far as the like how surprising it is and how creative it is, than Weather With You. But it it's not nearly as good as Your Name. Neither is Weathering With You, of course. But it's something exciting. And for me, I personally felt like the Mario Brothers movie was so bland and it was just really dull to me. And this was exciting to come after that because this has energy and excitement and creativity and new ideas and new characters. And I just really appreciate that.
Oh yeah. If one was to ask me which movie to pick over the other, I would definitely say this one for sure.
Yeah.
Not just as like, a work of animation being much more vivid and interesting to look at. Not that Mario isn't, like it's a very beautiful looking movie on its own, but this is something that is made from someone with a vision,
Yeah.
someone who has like, artistic but also, altruistic intentions behind it, and
Yeah.
wanting to help people cope with their trauma from the earthquake that happened.
Yeah.
Um, but I think for me, I just wish that I felt the themes hit harder a bit for me myself
Hmm.
because at times it gets kind of lost in the minutia of the plot. sometimes things could have used more time to develop a story more. Things could have been cut out, kind of like we talked about. But I really loved the ideas at play here. I think Suzume is a great protagonist, one that pretty much everyone could look up to as a role model, someone who's like actively going about helping people, selflessly. And I
Mhm.
think is just like a very plucky and fun individual.
Yeah.
And Sota's a great companion to her, and that he's a bit more grounded, but at the same time, he kind of has like a fun side of
Yeah.
himself,
And he was
and
pretty
everything just kind
dreamy
of comes
at
full
that
circle.
beginning.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. He was pretty dreamy at the beginning. Agree.
I mean, it's no wonder that she stopped on her bike and was like, "Hey, wait a second."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, let us know if you're listening what you think of Suzume. If you've gotten to see it, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And Zach, where can people find you and your content?
Yeah. So if you'd like to look up the videos that I make, my YouTube channel is called Kircher Talks Entertainment. You can also find me on Twitter to search up my name, Zach Kircher, or on Letterboxd. That's where I post most of my film related thoughts. But if I have something that I feel deserves more time and attention, I'll put up a YouTube video. I don't know, my productivity on YouTube is nowhere near as prolific as Rachel's. But I just like doing this as a hobby, not looking to really get into anything as a career. Just I
Sure.
like talking about this.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, take a look. I'll put all the links in the description, and you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. And make sure to check out the Hallmarkies podcast. Got lots of fun stuff going on over there. And I'm very excited. Just today, I have finally finished setting up my Rachel's Reviews theater site where I'm
Woo!
going to be having all of my theater reviews. So I'm so excited about that. So I'll put a link down. Y'all should check that out. And if you are listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. That really helps a lot. And if you are watching on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that so much. I'll have a link for all of my anime content. We reviewed most of the Studio Ghibli with Stanford, and I've done lots of Your Name, and I've done all of the Makoto Shinkai, almost all of his films. So there's lots of stuff there. I'll put it in the description. So check that out, please. And also we have the patron group and merch store. You can get hashtag animation junkie shirts. So please take a look at that. And thanks so much, Zach. This was a lot of fun to talk about. And I look forward to kind of seeing how this movie sits with me. And I really feel like it has the potential to grow in my estimation the more I see it. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I hope so too. That it,
Yeah.
as I watch it more over the years, it certainly gets better in my estimation. But it's been fun. I
Yeah.
appreciated getting the chance to talk to you, and I'm always down to talk about anything if we ever want to
Yeah.
do this again.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks so much, everybody. And we'll talk to y'all later. Bye.